it being January 18th today, it is Martin Luther King Day here in the United States, and I think it really behooves us to really understand the anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist that Martin Luther King Jr. was himself. And at least for my K through 12, I got a much more sanitized and whitewashed version of Martin Luther King, more concerned with his civil rights work, which was obviously, super important, but conveniently leaving out his critiques of capitalism and imperialism and the U.S. war machine, and in particular, his criticisms of the war in Vietnam. So just going to go over a couple of articles here talking about that. King's anti-war sentiments emerged publicly for the first time in March '65 when King declared that millions of dollars can be spent every day to hold troops in South Vietnam, and our country cannot protect the rights of Negroes in Selma. King told reporters on Face the Nation that as a minister he had a prophetic function and one greatly concerned about the need for peace in our world and survival of mankind. I must continue to take a stand on the issue. In early '67, King stepped up his anti-war proclamations, giving similar speeches in LA and Chicago. The Los Angeles speech, called The Casualties of the War in Vietnam, stressed the history of the conflict and argued that American power should be harnessed to the service of peace and human beings, not an inhuman power unleashed against defenseless people. Wow. King followed with an historical sketch outlining Vietnam's devastation at the hands of deadly Western arrogance, noting that we are on the side of the wealthy and the secure while create hell for the poor. To change course, King suggested a 5-point outline for stopping the war, which included a call for unilateral ceasefire. To King, however, Vietnam War was the most pressing symptom of American colonialism worldwide. King claimed that America made peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and the pleasures that come from the immense profits of overseas investments. King urged instead a radical revolution of values, emphasizing love and justice rather than economic nationalism. Look at this. The immediate response to King's speech was largely negative. Both the Washington Post and New York Times published editorials criticizing the speech, with the Post noting that King's speech had diminished his usefulness to his cause, to his country, and to his people through a simplistic and flawed view of the situation. And have those New York Times in particular as a so-called paper of record, have they ever went back and apologized that? Because obviously King was completely vindicated on the shit show that the war in Vietnam was at that time, and even became after that, MLK's warnings of America's spiritual death. So he, to paraphrase, he talked about how, when a country spends more on war, death, and destruction than it does on programs of social uplift, they are approaching spiritual death. Completely true at that time, and even more true now, given that the United States spends more on the military than the next 10 countries combined, while people in the United States don't have health care, shackled with student loan debt, huge issues of racial injustice and disproportionality, and all of these different areas. Let's see. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Riverside Church speech was titled Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence. It was delivered exactly 1 year before his April 4th, 1968 assassination in Memphis. In the speech, King declared, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." The people who heard that speech recognized it as one of the most powerful speeches ever given, articulating the immorality of the Vietnam War and its destructive impact on social progress in the United States. In explaining his decision to follow his conscience and speak out against U.S. militarism, King said, "I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in the rehabilitation of its poor so long as adventures like Vietnam continued to draw men and skills and money like some demonic, destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such." He's completely right, then and now. But King went farther, diagnosing the broader disease of militarism and violence that was endangering the souls of the U.S. King said, "I can never again," this is one of the most powerful quotes from my perspective that he's given, at least that I've come across. "I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government." True then, as it's true now, unfortunately. Let's see. King urged his fellow citizens to take up the causes of the world's oppressed rather than taking the side of the oppressors, he said. "I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people," it's also a critique of capitalism, what he's saying there, "the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In the unfolding conundrum of life and history, there's no such thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. We still have a choice today: nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. We must move past indecision to action. We must find new ways to speak for peace and justice throughout the developing world, a world that borders on our doors." Signing his own death warrant. Announcing so forcefully the war crimes that the U.S. government was committing daily in the killing fields of Vietnam, some of King's followers understood he had just signed his own death warrant. But King, being a person, this kind of goes back to what Huey P. Newton talked about in his book, Revolutionary Suicide. King knew, kind of in his heart of hearts, that by taking this route, by calling out the U.S. war crimes in Vietnam, being such a vocal opponent of the war there, like this article says, signing his death warrant, but he knew it was the right thing to do, even if it cost him his life. That is just super, super courageous, and not many would make that sacrifice. King also connected the racist acts of American soldiers, joyfully killing dispensable non-white gooks and slants, often shooting at anything that moves on the battlefield of Southeast Asia, to the oppression, impoverishment, and imprisoning and lynching of dispensable, deprived non-white N-word in America. King saw the connection between the violence of racism and the violence of poverty, yes. He saw that the withholding of economic and educational opportunities came from the fear of the other and the perceived need to protect the white culture's wealth and privilege with violence if necessary. Nick Yu's famous photo of terrified South Vietnamese children fleeing from a napalm attack on the village of Trong Bang in 1972. The girl, Phan Thi Kim Phuc, has ripped off her burning clothes. This is what Martin Luther King was speaking out against, along with the My Lai massacre, all of these things. King's anti-war stance was based on his Christianity and the ethics and life of Jesus, but is also based on his standing as a revered international peace and justice icon. Those factors made him a dangerous threat to the military, industrial, congressional security complex. J. Edgar Hoover and his obedient FBI accelerated after the Riverside speech. FBI ramped up their smear campaign against. Eventually, he was neutralized with a bullet to the head. Yeah, and then, there's a lot of, evidence that the, CIA maybe played a part in this. I think the King family, the King estate actually won a lawsuit against the government, like the late 90s, early 2000s about that. There's the My Lai massacre. Yeah. Let's see. And then, which one's this? And then just some quotes about, so we see that anti-imperialist side of MLK with regards to, calling out militarism and specifically the war in Vietnam. Imagine you already know that I'm much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. Capitalism started with a noble and high motive. I would probably disagree with him there. It's intrinsically linked to slavery, actually. But like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing it was revolting against. So today, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. I completely agree with the last part. In a sense, you could say we're involved in the class struggle. Definitely a very socialistic, Marxist thing to say. And one day, we must ask the question, why are there 40 million people in America, poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you're raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. Capitalism forgets that life is social. And the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. I would disagree a little bit there. I think communism should be the kind of end goal that we're all working for, but point taken. Call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within the country for all God's children. Completely agree. We must recognize that we can't solve our problem now until there's a radical redistribution of economic and political power. Definitely true then, and I think even more true now with the massive rates of income and wealth inequality in the U.S. This means a revolution of values and other things. We must see now that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. Yes, you can't really get rid of one without getting rid of the others. The whole structure of American life must be changed. And America is a hypocritical nation, and we must put our own house in order. Yes, highly hypocritical. The evils of capitalism are as real as the evils of militarism and the evils of racism. This is pretty interesting. I'm now convinced that the simple approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed matter, the guaranteed income, or UBI, Universal Basic Income. The curse of poverty has no justification in our age. It is socially as cruel and blind as the practice of cannibalism at the dawn of civilization, when men ate each other because they had not yet learned to take food from the soil to consume the abundant animal life around. The time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. Let's see. We are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be a better redistribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward democratic socialism. I would take out the democratic and put socialism part, because socialism is inherently democratic. Let's see. And then last one. If America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. He didn't pull any punches, but again, I was never exposed to this side of Martin Luther King's legacy. My K through 12 education, I definitely got more exposed to this outside of that. But I think it's, very telling the version of Martin Luther King that we are presented to, that the mainstream media presents. They obviously don't highlight his anti-imperialist, his anti-capitalist critiques, and instead go with the more watered down version of him as just being a civil rights advocate, when he was so much more than that. And I think we can really learn a great deal for what the price he was willing to pay to stand up and fight for what he knew was right in his heart, standing up against U.S. imperialism, calling out the war in Vietnam as being this really horrible, destructive thing, both for the U.S. soldiers being sent there, then obviously for the Vietnamese people as well. And just really, really powerful, important piece and person. Rest in peace, MLK. Subscribe for more content. Peace, much love, all power to the people.